Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of Winning the Challenger Sale. All November long, we are discussing how to close out the year with a strong close. How do we fortify our sales process against competition, status quo, and indecision, and also motivate action in the late stages of an opportunity? Today, we welcome Sam Sr. to the show. Sam is a co-founder and CEO of Testbox. Originally from Australia, which I guess you'll gather from his accent, he studied software engineering and economics and then went to work for Bain for 6 years as a senior manager. He is now focused on building the future of software, and he lives in Boulder, Colorado. So go Buff, Sam. And we're going to jump right in. So Sam, welcome.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm really excited to be here talking through all of the pieces of closing this year out strongly with you.
Yes, I was so excited when you agreed to join because I know you were super excited about this topic in particular. So first, let's just start with Testbox. What inspired you to co-found Testbox, and what is the mission behind the company and sort of the context of the sales process?
Yeah, so you mentioned that prior to this, I was actually working in consulting firm Bain. A lot of my inspiration for Testbox came from that experience. So I was working with large enterprise software companies, talking to their end buyers and understanding that all of them were just really frustrated at buying software. And I just saw this challenge consistently being there. And then I talked to my clients about it, and they really didn't know how to solve it. And what it really came down to was that the software buying experience felt very opaque to the end purchaser, where they felt like they had very little control, and it felt like they were buying into a black box rather than something where they were extremely confident that they were getting the right solution for their needs. And so when I saw this problem, I was actually living with someone at the time who's going through a software evaluation process themselves. And basically, they had a VP coming in saying, like, we need to buy Salesforce. We need to buy Salesforce. I believe in it 100%. And the team was like, absolutely not. We're not ready for it. There was still only like a 200-person size company or something like that, right? They went through this process. They ended up buying Salesforce. 18 months later, they didn't get it implemented. Nothing worked. They got all their money back from Salesforce, money back from implementation partners, and then they switched over to the system that they actually wanted. And this whole time, like the co-founder of the company and this person I was living with was telling me, like, if we'd been able to test these products side by side, being able to A/B test them, or even just get our hands on something that looks and felt like us, we would never have bought the Salesforce platform. We would have bought something else instead. And so this is where we came up with this concept of how do you really enable the software buyer to get a ton of confidence in the platform that they're purchasing, and then you as a software vendor be able to give exceptional, personalized, tailored experiences without you needing to spend tons of SE resources to actually deliver that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. So the whole idea behind Testbox is actually let's manage your entire demo automation experience where you can go in and say, I'm talking to Coca-Cola this morning and I'm talking to Adidas this afternoon, and I can show them a very different demo experience with data that looks different for each of them and reflects who they are, different configurations and use cases, and not just showcase it to someone, but then say, now go walk away with the keys, play with it by yourself for the next 7 to 10 days, invite your key team members, then the AEs get all these analytics back on how they're using it, what they're doing, what not, And so basically we're able to completely constrict and reduce down all of that lack of confidence that people have from just seeing something to them having a guided experience where they get to test certain things out with walkthroughs and data that looks like them, all this sort of stuff. So our whole thing is like, how do we massively reduce the amount of time and energy you need to put into building demos, showcasing product, building POCs, all of that, instead make it a click of a button, push up win rates significantly, and actually shorten deal cycles as well. So that's the main focus of what we've been delivering for the last couple of years.
When we think about like the landscape of software buying, you kind of just talked about it. It continues to evolve, and it doesn't just impact software, right? It impacts the buyer expectations across the board. So, obviously you created this company based on trends you're seeing. So what were some of the trends that you were seeing? For us, we see a lot around indecision, and this is something that I think would be huge around, that indecision piece. But like, what were some other trends where you're like, this is the right solution to that problem?
So there's two trends in particular. One is around this change from sales-led to product-led to now what I call customer-led buying. And then the second is actually around, and frankly, this has been very obvious for the last year in particular, is around the economics of mid-market and SMB and how we're serving them today being actually very poor for companies. And so I'll talk about each of those topics separately. If I think about the buying experience overall, 30 years ago, everything was sales-led. It made a ton of sense. We're having to educate buyers on how software worked and what made sense and what didn't, right? And now we then went the hard pivot all the other way to say we're now going product led, right? And this idea of actually someone doesn't want to speak to anyone at all, just throw them
Right.
into the software, they'll figure it out. And
Right.
there is some software that makes a ton of sense, right? Like Zoom. I don't need to be taught how to use
Yeah.
Zoom,
Slack.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
right. But I sure need to be taught how to, use an ERP or use a customer success platform or like a
Right.
complex CRM or like whatever it is, right? And so suddenly we went from like hardcore sales led to hardcore product led. And actually none of those experiences are focused on the customer. And so
Mhm.
what I think about is the idea of customer led buying. And there's this broader concept of customer led growth, but let's just focus on the buying part specifically. And to me, that's about, okay, how do you actually give the customer the experience that they want? So do they want a little bit of that product led experience where they get their hands on it? Or do they want a fully sales led experience? How do you combine those two things together where it's fully personalized and tailored to them? And that actually means that the buyer isn't really frustrated, right? Buyers have done
Right.
so much research before they hit your website,
Right.
before they do a
Right.
demo, before they do
100% done. Yep.
like
Yep.
they get a free trial, whatever it is. They
Yeah.
just want you to now transition from being someone who's selling to them to someone who's essentially standing next to them, being their peer and consulting them on how to be successful. And whether that's like holding their hand through the process and giving them access to the product to try some different stuff or whatever it is, it really is around like, let's reconcile this concept of sales and product led growth and bring them together into being a customer led buying experience. And that's why customers want to be central to it rather than almost being the receivers of a buying
Right.
experience, if that
Right.
makes any sense.
Putting the customer in the middle versus the outcome, the end piece makes complete sense. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about how our sales process is so elongated, right? We have so many more stakeholders. I think the last statistic was around 15 people in an average deal. Everything from the actual business user all the way up to procurement to a CFO. So
Yeah.
what I was just thinking about, Challenger, we call them mobilizers, the people who essentially champion your product or your software. And so for you, I was just thinking, like, I'm sure this is really compelling too for a lot of people that are trying to get this, across the finish line. You're helping to enable those customers to get their stakeholders, their influencers in the organization too.
That's right. That's why we built the ability to have a champion, but then add other stakeholders to these experiences, and then get analytics that can coach your account team on like, hey, the buyer didn't actually engage with the experience. The key
Mhm.
decision maker, only one person did, or actually they engaged for 5 hours. They did these 6 things, and they all interacted in there in the last few days. And so now your engagement is entirely different because you have such better data on how people are experiencing your product and learning about it as well. So you're exactly right.
In this day and age with the economy the way it is, indecision has become such a huge driver of lost deals. And
Yeah.
how do sales leaders just in general become more effective at promoting action and really preventing that indecision? Obviously your tool is one way, but what's the holistic way that people you see people really combating indecision?
It's incredibly challenging right now, right?
Yeah.
We have win rates that are down probably 50% on average across the
Right.
industry. So it's not surprising that everyone is struggling on this. But a lot of the time, what we see our customers being successful doing is things like give to get is becoming increasingly important because there's
Mhm.
people saying like, you know what, I think I have budget, I maybe have budget, whatever it is. But if you say, look, I'm going to give you access to this experience, or I'm going to give you this trial, or I'm going to give you this document, or we're going to build this thing for you. You need to know what the outcome is before you actually give that experience to the customer to use themselves. Because otherwise, it's so easy for someone to leave a call and say, yeah, that'd be helpful. And so it's so much is on the account executive to get really clear alignment within the call on if I do X for you, you will therefore do Y. And can you go and tell me that you can also do Z? And so like I was on a call the other day with someone, I said, look, we can absolutely give you a proof of concept of how your product would work within Testbox, but I need you to confirm with me that you have budget because it's going to take my team 2 or 3 days just to make sure we integrate your platform correctly, all that sort of
Right.
thing.
Right.
Do you definitely have that? And I saw a bunch of indecision of like, oh, actually, maybe I need to go check with someone. And so suddenly I saved my team a ton of time just through those sorts of questions. So it's really identifying what are those key questions that enable you to see, like, are there 7 questions or 7 answers that you're looking for with objections or
Right.
answers you're concerned about that tell you this is not going to close, or actually tell you there's a lot of confirmation, a lot of green flags. So identifying your red and your green flags, particularly the green flags with an organization to say, like, let's keep focusing on this deal is really, really important. And the last thing that I've really been experiencing a lot recently is that I am super stretched thin on the deals that I am working. Currently, I'm running revenue for us. And I am working probably 3 times as much pipeline as I should be.
Right.
And so I actually have someone come in. I have a coach who's helping me just be like, prioritize this deal, don't do this, like really working through it. And so I think it's really incumbent on sales managers and sales leaders to sit down with their teams and really carefully go through every single deal. What are the green flags? What are the red flags? Are we going to keep focusing on that? Are we actually going to deprioritize it for 3 days, even though the customers maybe emailed us because this other deal is going to actually go through faster? So let's focus on that. So a lot of those conversations need to be happening in the teams. I really recommend green flags, red flags as a system to figure out which deals to focus on and which ones not to.
We have the same conversations at Challenger. Obviously everyone's trying to get as much pipeline because we know the conversion rates are down. So what do? You just try to build more pipeline. And so, but to your point, then everyone's on way more deals than they probably want to be. And you have more stakeholders in those deals. So time management is so key. What are some of the things that like sales enablement can help with? If you have a sales enablement team, obviously you're talking about managers and coaching and the green flags, red flags. I love that idea. But what are some other things if you have like a sales enablement team, for example, like what material should they be helping to sort of get out to customers during this process?
I think first it starts with discovery, right? With that AE to really understand, is this a competitive deal? Okay. Are there any key battle cards we need to be bringing to the table? Is there a technical component to my product? How do I not just verbally explain it to you, but how do I visually explain something if it's maybe hard for people to wrap their head around? So like identifying what are all those little sticking points. The sales enablement team basically need to go interview the account executives, interview the sales engineers, and understand what are the 5 to 10 things that just slow deals down consistently.
Right.
And then what can we do about that? Is it a material? Is it a video on our website that we can point people to?
Right.
Is it like, what is the content that you can create? And then you need to go train the account executives on that content specifically. And so I think it's really incumbent on sales enablement to interview the AEs and the SEs really closely on anything that's slowing their deals down so that they can build materials around it for them.
I do think there's a healthy balance of content, but also making sure that you're being very strategic about when you give them content.
Well, one thing that's sort of around this customer-led buying experience piece that a prospect actually gave the idea to us recently was, hey, could we enable some form of live chat in these experiences that customers are playing with, where they could message in directly to the AE for when they have questions? And then you can have communication there instead of everything needing to be in a long email thread. So kind of figuring out what are all the little opportunities for you to make it easier for the customer to learn and for them to communicate with you without always going to that long email thread, sending that link or whatever it is. How do you make it possible to have more of that real time where the customer is driving the process rather than the rep driving the process?
One of the things we've done at Challenger is we have a product called Loop, which is similar. We're measuring the sales experience from the customer perspective, and it's in real time. So rather than wait 6 months for you to find out a deal, you lost a deal or you won a deal, in real time, are you actually having a good sales experience? Is your AE or AD teaching you something new? Are you having a good experience with our product, with our CS team, for existing customers? So really, to your point, knowing something in flight is so much more critical than waiting till the very end, especially during when there's no decision. And that's happening so often. You don't have the luxury of waiting 6 months to find out that deal, actually, they don't have budget for it. So
figuring out a way to get permission with your champion to be able to move out of email with them is actually very important. I personally have found, you're nodding, I suspect you've experienced this as well. Yeah. The deals that have been the most successful, move the fastest, where I've had the most clarity or had the most clarity that they're not going to work is when I've been able to move to a text-based relationship or I've just been able to pick up the phone with someone. But there's a little bit of respect that you need to have of actually like asking for permission, checking that you can actually text them about something. So finding a way to casually enable that sort of relationship. People just seem to be a bit more honest when they're not having to create formal emails that's sending from the work email that have all these other people CC'd on them. And sometimes you just get a lot more transparency there as well.
Yeah, we have an AE who's fantastic at doing that, and she'll obviously I help her with some deals every once in a while. She'll bring me in, and she literally will send me the text messages. I'm like, this is genius. So I 100% agree with that because I think to your point, like also, if you think about generationally, like we've the way we communicate has become so much less formal. Like, I have a 17 and a 20-year-old. So, I mean, I wouldn't even think to call them. Like, I don't think my son would even know how to pick up the phone, to be honest. So, you know,
Well, that is genuinely a thing that I hear
right.
it from the other people on my team. They're just like, I'm never picking up the phone to you, Sam.
Yeah.
Like, even though I know you pretty well, like that's just not a thing that I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I'm curious about from your take on this is actually like I have found when I have got in person with someone, it is so effective now.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really interesting because like everything used to be in person, right? And
Yeah.
that was really hard. And everyone's like, oh, the salesperson's coming in, whatever. Then we moved all the way virtual. And now actually, like virtual is good, but then eventually, if you get in person with someone, things move a lot faster. You build a lot of trust. Shaking that hand with someone makes the whole process, the relationship, the partnership grow in a really exciting way. And I know it sounds a bit silly, but I actually think there's an untapped opportunity here for people to go see that person live and just make an excuse to be in their town and see them for that
Yeah.
hour.
I always say that. I mean, I come from the, way different generation of selling. And it was always like, hey, I happen to be right by your office. And by the way, I happen to have a contract in my bag. This is before,
Did you want to look at
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So right. I mean, it is. We've been doing a lot of that at Challenger. To be honest, I've been doing a lot of customer lunches, dinners, keynotes, and to your point, one, you can have those conversations just like you're talking about text messaging. You can have those casual conversations, like, I think especially people. I'm a recovering relationship builder. People who are used to selling from a relationship perspective, they can still then get that relationship piece where they do get to know them a little bit better, but then also, to your point, like move the process along because they are differentiating. I also think getting back to data, I think if a customer is actually willing to meet you in person, take time out of their day, they're serious about that relationship and potentially buying because we all default to Zoom being just so much easier. And, it does take 2 hours versus a 1 hour Zoom meeting. So,
But actually, that 2 hours that it took was instead of two Zoom meetings or three Zoom meetings
yes,
and like
yes.
five emails and the like mental overhead of needing to send all those emails. Like earlier this year, I was in Europe for a bunch of different reasons. My wife is Irish, so we're visiting her family,
Oh, nice. I love
and I knew we were coming up to like a new contract with one of our potential customers. We've done some stuff with them. They're in Copenhagen. I flew over to see them. Um, Actually worked out of their office for about an hour. We had some conversations. Then the CFO went and gave me a tour of Copenhagen through like the
Oh my
Queen's
God.
residences and the horses stables and like all this stuff for about an hour. And we hadn't yet signed a contract or anything, but I knew that obviously this was going to be a really great relationship. And I'd say like I now have a very good relationship with the CEO, and these moments that you can create are just really powerful for maybe not even just the contract, but the partnership, the case study, the like
Right.
broader human relationships that you have as a result of these little moments are really powerful.
Yeah, yeah. We're actually doing a customer dinner in New York next month, and that is partly why we're doing it is because we're like we need to bring our customers together. We need to see them. So I completely agree. Love that. That's why partly I asked before the podcast. We were chatting about we'll both be in Nashville next week, so I was like, oh look, now we get to meet in person.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So one question I have for you is, obviously your solution is very tailored to SaaS software product space. Not all of our listeners, some of them come to the services business. How can someone take the model of Testbox, that solution, and use it for, a non-software product, and sort of contextualize it? Do you have any recommendations on that?
So from a more conceptual level, really it is about identifying for each of your customer base, do you have different segments throughout it, or is everyone homogenous? If they're homogenous, like great, just have the same generic experience for them when you're talking to them.
Right.
Assuming you have some segmented experience between, large companies, small companies, different industries, different personas, whatever it is, you can test your way into this. Find out the like two or three personas that really matter to you and cover, 50 to 80% of your revenue, and see if you can tailor something from that generic experience just to them. And think of a couple of things that you're trying to test. You're trying to test, does this reduce the deal cycle by 1 or 2 meetings? Does this increase our win rate in some capacity or reduce our need to like go beyond the extra mile in some other way? And so what are the ways you can potentially do that? There's obviously simple things like make sure all of your case studies that you're talking about, even in a services business, are to do with, customers who look like them? Or is it, every example of, I talk to companies who like are salon software companies as well as CRMs, and like I make sure I'm always talking about all of their concepts on those calls. So can you identify for those couple of segments, like what is the playbook that you can run that's actually fairly differentiated? So that's probably going to be something you can start to test into, do some analysis on that. And then secondly, as you move towards, hey, how do we actually prove that we can do what you want us to be able to do? I think that's a big question a lot of people have. They're like, look, my budget's really tight. I can't take a lot of risk right now. You then need to figure out, like, what is it that's going to cross that hurdle for someone? And can you figure out a way to actually just give it to them for free in some mechanism? So, I have a friend who, one of his big things, he runs a data services business. His whole thing is like helping people identify the best leads that for their company. And so what he does, he sits down with them for 45 minutes and he just builds it for them. And he builds, a lead list for the first 50 really great customers. They look through it together on a call, and invariably someone walks away and goes, I would never have known that information. That's exceptional. How do I get more of it? Great, ready to sign a contract. So for him, he's giving away a bunch of value in 45 minutes, but he's controlling the keyboard. So it's not giving away for free, but it's enough to entice someone. So that's like a similar version of Testbox, where he's, instead of productizing it fully, he's basically productizing his service in a 45-minute like working session that gives a lot of value. And someone says, like, if you're giving this amount of value away for free, imagine all the value I'm going to get if I actually pay you. So try and identify that thing that you might be able to give away for free, or you can promise that you can deliver in some small mechanism that gives them just a taste of the value of what you're actually delivering, rather than expecting people just to believe you on a promise.
We've tried to do that. We, for example, will audit your pitch deck. That was one of our initiatives. And the whole idea was like, teach, don't pitch. So we went through, we made an offering. We said, hey, we'll go through your pitch deck and see, where you're pitching versus teaching. Obviously that we did that free of charge, but then the idea is that teaches you around our teaching challenger methodology. So I think that's a really, really good point. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the stat around 85% of decision makers have sort of that day one list of vendors that they want to work with. So, which obviously our goal is to all be on that list, but what do you do to kind of make sure you're on that day one list? Because obviously they haven't gotten to Testbox yet at that point.
It's so tricky. And it's so funny that you said that. I think I've quoted exactly that stat on a podcast myself, because it was actually my former employee. So Bain and Google did analysis together that basically said, I think it was like 87% or 92% or something, like it's somewhere in that range of purchases are from the day one list. So love that you just quoted that.
Yeah, and maybe I was doing my research, so it's probably you that I heard.
Maybe it was me.
Honestly, I've listened to so many podcasts. I walk my dog and literally listen to podcasts, so I have all this data floating in my head. So
I love it. Okay, great. Well, it's so hard to break through that day one list if you're not there. So what are all the ways? It's taking this insurgent mindset as much as you can. Typically, the day one list is a bunch of incumbents and then maybe 1 or 2 insurgents if the insurgents are lucky. So really focus on, pretend you're the insurgent. If you are the incumbent and struggling in a new market, like bring this insurgent mindset. So what are all the places that people are going when they're looking to create their day one list? People aren't just walking around knowing, here are the 5 software companies in a marketing automation that I want to buy. Like, they do some research. So what are all the places that people go?
Like G2 Crowd and
Exactly. So G2 Crowd, Trust Radius, they're on LinkedIn, but they're now also in communities a lot. And they're talking to people in Slack, on Pavilion or like Rev Genius or whatever it is, right? And so identifying what is the state of each of those places? How do you exist? Are you even in the conversation? And then choose a channel that you can double down on for a period of time and really do an excellent job. So is that a community strategy where, you just in there being helpful with people, and then they start being like, oh, who's this person? Why do they know about this thing? And then they do a bit of more research on you. Or is it actually, you're just social selling, you're talking about problems that people have, and not necessarily about your solution, but problems that people have in this space, and just continue to talk about them, people will be like, oh, what's this person doing? Why should I be interested in that? So go look at what founders do when they're trying to build a new category or build a brand for their company or whatever it is, and go replicate that as much as you can and just choose one or two channels, get really good at it, start and measure it a little bit, start to see that results, then think about other channels as well. Because I actually have found a bunch of times in talking to a customer or a buyer, and they're like, oh, I always ask them where I heard about them from, they heard about us from. For the first year, it was always, oh, I just saw this thing about you on LinkedIn that someone said, right? And I was like, great, that channel is working. I got to keep doing that.
Right.
We then recently I started hearing someone say, oh, I've heard your name come up in some communities recently. So I was like, oh, which communities? I went into that communities and I was like, okay, people are starting to talk about us in this ways. How do I amplify that? So go choose the channel and measure it, and then watch founders and see what they're doing, because they're the ones who are just trying to hack anything and everything to make it possible.
Right. And they're also the best, evangelists. We always talk about, I teach a class called Leading and Launching Startups. We always talk about the founder sale, right? There's nothing better than a founder sale. So,
well, I think that's actually slightly controversial. So I had a friend and I were talking about this recently. And the founder, we are, speaking for myself anyway, exceptional at telling a story, exceptional at showing energy and passion about something. Most of us are terrible at running a sales process.
That is true. That is actually very true.
And I think we get all this credit for being incredible, and it's just not true at all, actually, when you break it down in detail. Founders actually need a lot of people helping them run processes. So if you're a VP of sales, you're an AE, or looking at teams that you're potentially joining a small company, know that you're going to be helping them figure out process. And actually, if they're having a lot of success today already, you can amplify that success very quickly by just teaching people how to sell, how to have creative negotiation tactics, how to get around roadblocks, how to not get scared by objections from customers, because something's so precious to that founder that any objection is scary. So anyway, I think that's actually a little misnomer that we've had over the last few years around how excellent founders are at selling.
I'll give you a little bit. I just, from what I see in my world, I do still feel like, to your point, I think storytelling is such a big piece of selling. And so often I think but often the founder tells the story better than, a lot of other people, because it's just
hands down agree.
So yeah, but we can agree to disagree. Well, we can settle it over some whiskey in Nashville, But okay, well, this has been such a great conversation. I can't believe the time is literally flying by. But just really quickly, obviously, Sam, I want to make sure our listeners, we were just talking about LinkedIn and Slack groups. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
100% on LinkedIn. That's the place I live the most. Just Sam Senior, LinkedIn, Testbox. I'm there a lot. I talk to a lot of people, post a bunch of stuff. It's a great place for me, actually.
Well, thank you so much. This was so enlightening. Love Testbox. Love the idea behind it. Looking forward to chatting more with you about it. Good luck with everything. And thanks again.
Thanks very much, Andee. See you in Nashville.